I used to be a great fan of people who had witty comebacks to what other people said, and then I began to realize something. For the most part, it's not particularly constructive or useful to do that sort of thing. I wanted to talk about the subject of Feel the Burn on the Daily Summation from Kurt's Religion and Politics. I'm your host. I'm Kurt. Today is Saturday, the 19th of March of 2022. Welcome to everyone who's here on Rumble, on the podcast, on YouTube, on BitChute, on CloudHub, on my Facebook page. That's the Kurt's Religion and Politics page there, on kurtzreligionandpolitics.locals.com, on Minds, MINDS.com, on the Kurt's Religion and Politics group primarily there, on Parler, on Gab on Twitter, or wherever else you happen to be catching me today. And again, the subject for today is Feel the Burn. And I've gotten into kind of doing questions as my subjects, and you're going to have to forgive me for that. But I do want to get into the notes that I've set up for myself to kind of explain to you sort of what I'm seeing and what it means to me in the long run somewhat. Just like a lot of people, I get caught up in certain clickbait on social media and elsewhere, right? I mostly ignore what's put out there, partly because there's a tendency to do egregious false advertising where the thing that's used to draw you in is nowhere on the place you land. They'll show images or whatever, and you'll go, "Oh, that looks interesting," and then you'll get there and you'll find that those images are nothing to do with what they've actually put out there. Once in a while, though, I take that bait. One such tantalizing carrot dangled before me was talking about how people were burned by clever comebacks. The sad reality was probably more than half of the incidents spoken about were not what they were advertised to be. Kudos to the guy who pointed out that a lady expecting a fella to know that she wanted him to, quote, try harder when he tried to ask her out, declining the request flatly the first time through. He described it as being ask what you want for lunch and answering pizza when you want a steak, when you really want a steak. Even this is not all that great a comeback, considering you might find yourself charged with harassment or even assault or abuse if you ask again after being rejected, right? So it's not really quite like the lunch thing, but it's close. It's at least the person got close, I think. Nothing like that is something you'd see in a lunch scenario, getting hauled off to jail or whatever, right? Not typically anyway. I'm not going to say it could never happen, but I don't think normally you're going to see that. Thing is, there were instances where a real look at the burn would make it totally fall apart. Take the person replying to the individual talking about cutting salt from out of your diet. He or she compared it to watching a blank sheet of paper instead of a streaming service. You could say a blank screen as well. That'd work. Point is the same either way. The point was essentially to say, yes, I could watch the blank page or the blank screen, but the streaming service content would be far more enjoyable and interesting. The problem should be obvious. Is it obvious to you? Because it should be. The guy or gal talking about cutting salt from one's diet was indirectly implying that salt is bad for you. You could agree or not, that's beside the point, whether or not salt is bad for you. In the analogy, we would have to assume the streaming service was bad for you as well. I'm not sure that's a bad argument, mind you. I sort of agree that most such things are at least not good for you a lot of the time. I doubt the person comparing the two had it as an intent to say that, though. I just don't think that's what they were intending to do. You can argue that it was still an apt way to show the silliness of the original position. You'll forgive me, though, if I disagree. And I do. I disagree. They did something that I don't think is reasonable. I may not believe it's all that important to cut salt out of your diet due to the harm it may cause, but I'm savvy enough to get that the person talking about cutting it wasn't doing so arbitrarily. That wasn't an arbitrary thing on their part. The one talking about streaming services, though, was doing just that by intent or not. They were quite arbitrary in what they had chosen to do. The point here is lots of times people compare and contrast things that aren't apples to apples. They're just not. They're apples to oranges, whatever you want to say. This is true for the majority of, quote, burns I've ever seen or heard. The result? Even if the person who said the thing they were burned over was wrong, the one trying to show that was the case did little to weaken, and in some cases, something to strengthen that being said by that individual. This is a large part of the reason I'm not a fan of, quote, the burn, end of quote, because I see it as a problem. Okay, done with my notes. Let's get on with this. And I want you to understand, I hear people say this periodically, and I'm going to say it today. I really enjoy doing what I do when I do my little videos. You might not like it, you might find it problematic, whatever, but I want you to know that I put my content out there because I really like what I'm doing. I get paid nothing for this at this point. At some point that may change, I don't know, but at this point I get paid nothing for what I do. So you have to know, if I didn't enjoy it, I wouldn't come back day after day. Okay, that little caveat being thrown out there, let me get on with what I'm saying. Look, it's far more important to find ways to get things across to people in ways that are not snarky, not ignorant, not arrogant, and worst of all, not wrong. Okay? It's far more important. When I do my content, I try to make it a careful thing to not make fun of, not snark at, and so forth other people. There are folks out there who are quite successful doing exactly those things. You look at people like Dan Bongino, he doesn't do it all the time. And he intersperses his stuff with salient, cogent points. And I'm not trying to say that's not the case. Tim Pool has a sort of a wry sense of humor that he uses to get his point across to people. You can do things like that, and I'm not saying that they're always inappropriate. But what I'm saying to you is the one-liner or two-liner burn seems like a great thing until you really start to look at what people are saying and begin to realize something. A lot of times what they say, not only, as I said in my notes, doesn't weaken the other person's argument, it actually sort of strengthens it in some instances. It makes it so that you're going, this person is an idiot who snarked off at this individual, and therefore I should really be looking more seriously what the person who initially spoke said. Now, again, you should always view everything pretty much objectively. You should always question everything, in my opinion. Now, of course, there are times you can't do that, and I get that. Get out of the way of that car. Yeah, you probably should just get out of the way of the car. But there are lots of times when, probably the majority of times, when you not only can question what other people are saying and doing and so forth, but you really should. And I'm okay with that. But being, quick-witted, unless you're really good at it, and there have been some people who have been very, very, very strong in that way. But even if you are, is not necessarily a beneficial thing. It's far more beneficial most of the time, instead of trying to burn somebody by making some comment, to point out to that person carefully and in a way where they can understand it. Because sadly, the thing about it is people will say the silliest things, and we know this is true. I'm not going to get into details, even though there are obvious examples. Well, okay, let me get into one. The current press secretary for the U.S. government, for the president, whatever you want to say, basically said we don't know whether or not COVID-19 is more serious, and I may get in trouble for saying this, is more serious for aged people and infirm people with comorbidities and stuff. And you could easily burn that person, as silly as it is, but the real answer is to say, look, if you look at the data out there, the CDC and the WHO, the WHO, will both acknowledge that that's true, that what people have said when they say that is in fact true. That old people and people with comorbidities, particularly if it's four or more, but regardless, are more at risk where COVID is concerned, and young people really aren't. We're not going to get into the data on that. The point is to make a point of saying that people will say things that we know are silly things. They are silly things, and we know it. Okay? So I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but burning them, I don't think that's really the answer most of the time. Explaining it reasonably, I think that's the better solution. Okay, I need to go ahead and wrap things up. This has been the Daily Summation from Kurt's Religion and Politics. I'm your host. I'm Kurt. Today is Saturday, the 19th of March of 2022, that end of the Sabbath at sunset today, sundown. Hope you're having a good Sabbath if you are one who observes it. Tomorrow will be Sunday, that beginning of the Christian week, according to most Christians, the 20th of March, Sunday the 20th of March. Thank you for having come along on Rumble, on the podcast, on YouTube, on BitChute, on CloudHub, on Facebook, on my Facebook page. That's kurtzreligionpolitics.facebook.com, on kurtzreligionpolitics.locals.com, on minds.com, on Parler, on Gab, on Twitter. I'm going to try and kind of reduce the time that I spend saying that sort of stuff because I'm changing my ending script, if you will, the thing that I put out there that talks about my sites and so forth. Subject for today has been Feel the Burn as a question, and tomorrow we're going to talk on the subject of price controls, and I want to explain why it is that price controls are a bad idea. I don't remember exactly what my thrust was, but you can be assured that that's the sort of thing that we're going to be talking about tomorrow. Hope that you're doing well today. Hope everything is going well for you, and hopefully we will see you again on Sunday's edition of the Daily Summation from Kurt's Religion and Politics. The speaker on this edition of the Daily Summation is Kurt Schubert. This podcast was created on Saturday, the 19th of March of 2022. The Daily Summation is created for Kurt's Religion and Politics. Thanks for watching today's edition of the Daily Summation from Kurt's Religion and Politics. Don't forget to come back tomorrow to check out the next one. Remember, on various platforms, primarily Rumble, YouTube, BitChute, and CloudHub, and the audio podcast, you can subscribe to my content. For the audio podcast, you probably want to use Apple, Google, or Spotify. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or Spotify. In order to find me on those platforms, you can go to the Kurt's Religion and Politics channels on Rumble, YouTube, BitChute, and CloudHub. You can also get to my content on Facebook by finding the Kurt's Religion and Politics page there. minds.com, where you will find me at the Kurt's Religion and Politics group, and Kurt's Religion and Politics.locals.com as well. You can look there. I post my daily video on various social media sites, really only about 3, Parler, Gab, and Twitter at present. I am at KP Schubert on each of them, and you can find me under them, and you can find the videos under me. You should be able to find my podcasts on Google and Apple Podcasts and Spotify. It's also on podcasts.kpschubert.com. That's podcasts with an S, .kpschubert.com. If you're looking for me on various of the podcast sites, you probably want to search Kurt's Religion and Politics, not the Daily Summation. Keep in mind, you can subscribe to my content on various places that I put it. All constructive feedback is welcome. You can like, dislike, add a rumble, or give whatever feedback is available on any of the platforms that you can do such things. You can also add a comment on what I put there. Unless you're advertising or doing something that I believe will harm others, I'll leave your comments out there even if I don't agree with or understand them. I will try to let you know I've seen them when possible and may reply if I feel it's reasonable, appropriate, and possible, of course. Thanks again for viewing this edition of the Daily Summation from Kurt's Religion and Politics. Don't forget to come back again for tomorrow's as well.